The World Cup draw used to feel like one of football's simpler rituals. A few pots, a few balls, a few nervous smiles, and suddenly the tournament had a shape. But for 2026, that old picture does not really work anymore. The draw is still a ceremony, but behind the ceremony is a much bigger machine. 48 teams, 3 host nations, 16 host city areas, 104 matches, 12 groups of 4, a new round of 32, and a set of rules designed to stop the tournament from becoming unfair before a ball has even been kicked. That is why this episode matters. The 2026 World Cup draw is not just about who plays who. It is about how football tries to make a bigger tournament feel balanced, understandable, and commercially workable at the same time. And the more you look at it, the more you realize the draw is one of the most important moments of the entire competition. If you enjoy this kind of football breakdown, subscribe to the Football Files, because the 2026 World Cup is going to be full of decisions that look simple on screen, but are incredibly complicated behind the scenes. First, the size of the tournament changes everything. The confirmed format for 2026 is built around 48 teams. Instead of the familiar 32-team World Cup, the tournament expands into 12 groups of 4. That means more countries, more matches, more possible storylines, and a much bigger draw structure. A draw that once had 8 groups now has 12. Every extra group adds more combinations, more restrictions, and more opportunities for awkward imbalance. The final tournament is also scheduled for 104 matches. That number matters because the draw is the first public moment where the tournament stops being an abstract format and becomes a real route. Supporters start calculating paths, broadcasters start shaping schedules, teams start thinking about travel bases, recovery windows, and likely opponents. A single placement in the draw can change the whole emotional tone of a national campaign. In the old 32-team structure, the draw was already carefully controlled. There were seeded teams, regional restrictions, and television considerations. But 2026 increases the amount of stress on the system. More teams do not simply mean more balls in a bowl. They mean a bigger fairness problem. The draw has to create groups that are competitive, geographically workable, and understandable to fans, without turning the ceremony into a technical manual. Second, 12 groups make the draw feel less symmetrical. Football fans are used to 8 groups. 8 groups feel clean. They fit easily on a wall chart. They lead neatly into 16 knockout places. 12 groups are different. They create a larger first phase and then feed into a new round of 32. The top 2 teams in each group advance, along with the 8 best third-place teams. That means the draw is not just deciding group opponents. It is also shaping the conditions under which third-place teams will be compared across the tournament. This is where the draw becomes psychologically important. In a group where the strongest team is extremely strong and the 4th team is clearly weaker, the battle for second and third can look very different from a group where all 4 teams are close. Because some third-place sides will advance, goal difference, game order, and opponent profile become even more sensitive. A difficult group might still offer a route through. A balanced group might become brutally tight. The draw therefore influences not only who is favored to qualify, but also how the best third-place race is likely to feel. Fans will talk about groups of death, but in 2026, there may also be groups of pressure. Groups where every goal, every late equalizer, and every disciplinary detail could matter beyond that group alone. The 2026 tournament is shared by Canada, Mexico, and the United States. That is historic and exciting, but it also makes the draw more complicated. Host teams normally receive special treatment in the schedule because they need clear opening matches, stadium allocation, and public visibility. With 3 hosts, that issue becomes larger. The draw has to respect the identity of the host nations, while still creating a competition that feels fair to everyone else. This is not only about ceremony. Hosts affect logistics. They affect where fans travel, how broadcasters promote early matches, and how the opening days of the tournament are framed. The draw has to balance the symbolic needs of the hosts with the practical needs of the tournament. It cannot simply scatter them at random and hope everything works. That is why the draw has to be seen as part sporting event and part operations plan. The audience sees balls being drawn. The organizers see stadium calendars, opening fixtures, host country expectations, security planning, fan movement, and commercial commitments. The host factor gives the 2026 draw an extra layer that a single country tournament does not have in the same way. Fourth, Confederation rules turn the draw into a puzzle. World Cup draws usually include restrictions that stop too many teams from the same confederation landing in the same group. The purpose is simple. The tournament should feel global from the first round. Supporters expect groups to bring together different football cultures, different styles, and different continents. But the more teams you have, the harder those rules become to apply cleanly. With 48 teams, the draw machine has to keep checking what is still possible. A team may look available for a group, but if placing it there would make a later legal placement impossible, the system has to prevent that. This is why modern draws often rely on computer assistance behind the visible ceremony. The drama still comes from the balls, but the fairness depends on a rule engine working in the background. That can frustrate fans because it makes the draw feel less pure. People like the romance of randomness, but a completely random draw could produce impossible or unfair outcomes. So the real question is not whether the draw is random. It is how much controlled randomness football needs in order to protect the global shape of the competition. Fifth, ranking pots do not solve everything. Seeding is designed to spread the strongest teams around the draw. In principle, that protects competitive balance. The highest-ranked teams are separated, and the tournament avoids loading too many giants into the same group. But rankings are never a perfect measure of tournament danger. Some teams arrive underrated, some big names arrive in transition, some qualifiers come through difficult paths and look stronger than their pot suggests. In 2026, the ranking pots will be only one part of the story. Because the tournament is bigger, the gap between the best teams and the last qualifiers may look wider on paper, but the middle of the field could be extremely complex. A team's pot may tell you where it sits in the official structure. It does not tell you how awkward its style is, how far its fans must travel, how suitable the climate is, or whether its group schedule is kind. This is why the draw can produce a group that looks fair mathematically, but still feels brutal in football terms. A physically intense team, a low-block specialist, a high-pressing outsider, and a seeded favorite can create a very different problem from four teams whose rankings suggest a similar spread. The draw sorts names. It does not fully sort styles. Not every placeholder may feel the same. Another complication is timing. A World Cup draw can happen before every final qualification route is fully resolved, especially when interconfederation playoffs or late qualifying windows are involved. That can leave placeholders in the draw. To casual viewers, a placeholder looks like a blank space. To teams and analysts, it can be a major uncertainty. One placeholder might eventually become a side with huge tournament experience. Another might become a debutante. Another might bring a very specific tactical threat. Until the identity is known, the group cannot be fully understood. That makes the 2026 draw more complicated for managers, scouts, and supporters. They are not just reacting to names. They may be reacting to possible names. This is also a communication problem. A draw ceremony has to make sense to millions of viewers. But if some slots are unresolved, the story becomes conditional. The group is not simply Group H. It is Group H plus a possible playoff winner with 3 different profiles. That uncertainty is part of modern tournament football. And in a larger World Cup, it becomes more visible. Seventh, travel changes how people judge fairness. The 2026 World Cup is spread across a huge geography. Canada, Mexico, and the United States create a tournament map unlike any single country event. Even with careful scheduling, teams and fans will think about distance, climate, and recovery in a different way. The draw is part of that because group placement can shape the travel story of a team's entire opening phase. A group that looks fair on football strength may feel less fair if one team faces more difficult travel, sharper climate changes, or less comfortable recovery windows. Modern football is decided by details. Rest days, pitch familiarity, weather, hotel bases, and flight times can all become part of the performance equation. In 2026, the draw cannot be separated from the map. For fans, this matters too. The draw tells supporters where they might need to go, what tickets they might chase, and how realistic it is to follow their team. In a tournament this large, the draw is also a travel announcement. It turns hope into logistics. For many supporters, that moment will be thrilling and stressful at the same time. Eighth, television and operations need the draw to be clear. A World Cup is not only a sporting event, it is a global broadcast operation. Once the draw is made, broadcasters can build storylines, allocate resources, and sell the drama of specific matches. Sponsors and host cities can plan around confirmed fixtures. Stadium teams can prepare for crowd profiles, security demands, and local transport pressure. The draw is the switch that turns the tournament from planning into execution. That is one reason the draw has to be both technically correct and easy to understand. If the process feels too complicated, viewers lose trust. If it is too simple, it may fail to protect the competition. This is the central tension of the 2026 draw. Fairness requires complexity, but football storytelling requires clarity. The best draws make the complexity invisible. The viewer remembers the big matches and the emotional reactions. The organizers remember the restrictions that had to be satisfied in the background. For 2026, that invisible work is likely to be heavier than ever. Ninth, the best third-place route changes group psychology. The return of a best third-place route means that group stage strategy can shift. In a classic 4-team group where only 2 advance, finishing third is failure. In 2026, finishing third may be survival. That changes how teams approach the final minutes of matches, especially if goal difference and points totals across groups become decisive. A team that is drawing late in a second match might not see that draw as passive. It might see it as a step toward a third-place qualification route. A team losing narrowly might protect goal difference because one goal could matter in the wider comparison. The draw influences this because some groups may appear to offer more realistic third-place points than others. This is not a flaw by itself. More knockout places mean more teams stay alive longer, which can create drama. But it does mean the draw has to be interpreted differently. The question is no longer just who will win the group. It is also which third-place teams might be strong enough and which groups might punish mistakes most severely. 10th, the draw will shape the whole conversation before the tournament. Once the draw is complete, the football world will immediately start ranking winners and losers. Some teams will be called lucky, others will be called trapped. Host nations will be analyzed through the lens of opening pressure. Dark horses will be identified. Possible knockout paths will be mapped before the first squad is even announced. But the truth is more subtle. A good draw can become difficult if a team arrives injured or out of form. A frightening draw can open up if a favorite collapses. Travel that looks harsh on paper may be managed well. A soft-looking group can become dangerous if the styles clash badly. The draw matters enormously, but it is not destiny. That is what makes it such a powerful moment. It gives football a story before football has begun. It creates expectation, fear, hope, and argument. For 2026, because the format is bigger and the map is wider, that story will have more moving parts than ever. So, when the 2026 World Cup draw arrives, do not watch it as a simple ceremony. Watch it as a pressure test for the biggest World Cup ever staged. Watch how the hosts are placed. Watch the ranking pots. Watch the regional restrictions. Watch the travel logic. Watch the possible third-place routes. And most of all, watch how football tries to make a 48-team tournament feel fair, global, and understandable in one night. Because the draw will not just tell us where the teams are going. It will tell us what kind of World Cup 2026 is going to be. Bigger, more complex, more global, and harder to explain than any tournament before it. That is the real story. The balls will come out one by one, but behind every ball will be a system fighting to hold the biggest World Cup in history together. There is also a trust issue running through the entire process. Supporters need to believe the draw is not being shaped for television at the expense of fairness. At the same time, organizers need a draw that can actually be scheduled and delivered. That is why transparency matters. The clearer the rules are before the ceremony, the easier it is for fans to accept moments that otherwise look strange. If a team cannot go into one group because of a Confederation limit, the audience should understand that this is not improvisation. It is the rulebook doing its job. For the biggest nations, the draw can be a trap in a different way. A seeded team is expected to control its group, but in 2026, it may have to manage travel, heat, an unfamiliar opponent, a third-place points race, and the emotional weight of being favorite. The draw can create a path that looks manageable on paper, but becomes exhausting in practice. Winning a group may still matter, but managing energy across a longer tournament may matter just as much. This is why the 2026 draw should be judged on more than headline matches. The obvious blockbuster fixtures will get the attention, but the hidden story will be structure. Which groups are balanced? Which routes look travel-heavy? Which teams may benefit from stadium familiarity? Which third-place paths seem realistic? Which group winners could face harder knockout roads than expected? Those questions are where the real draw analysis begins. For smaller football nations, this complexity comes with opportunity. Expansion gives more teams a place on the stage, and the draw can suddenly place a debutante against a giant, a regional rival against a familiar opponent, or a tactical outsider into a group where its style becomes a real problem. That is part of the beauty of a larger World Cup. The risk is that the structure becomes harder to follow. The reward is that more stories enter the tournament from day one. There is also a trust issue running through the entire process. Supporters need to believe the draw is not being shaped for television at the expense of fairness. At the same time, organizers need a draw that can actually be scheduled and delivered. That is why transparency matters. The clearer the rules are before the ceremony, the easier it is for fans to accept moments that otherwise look strange. If a team cannot go into one group because of a Confederation limit, the audience should understand that this is not improvisation. It is the rulebook doing its job. For the biggest nations, the draw can be a trap in a different way. A seeded team is expected to control its group, but in 2026, it may have to manage travel, heat, an unfamiliar opponent, a third-place points race, and the emotional weight of being favorite. The draw can create a path that looks manageable on paper but becomes exhausting in practice. Winning a group may still matter, but managing energy across a longer tournament may matter just as much. This is why the 2026 draw should be judged on more than headline matches. The obvious blockbuster fixtures will get the attention, but the hidden story will be structure. Which groups are balanced? Which routes look travel-heavy? Which teams may benefit from stadium familiarity? Which third-place paths seem realistic? Which group winners could face harder knockout roads than expected? Those questions are where the real draw analysis begins. For smaller football nations, this complexity comes with opportunity. Expansion gives more teams a place on the stage, and the draw can suddenly place a debutante against a giant, a regional rival against a familiar opponent, or a tactical outsider into a group where its style becomes a real problem. That is part of the beauty of a larger World Cup. The risk is that the structure becomes harder to follow. The reward is that more stories enter the tournament from day one. There is also a trust issue running through the entire process. Supporters need to believe the draw is not being shaped for television at the expense of fairness. At the same time, organizers need a draw that can actually be scheduled and delivered. That is why transparency matters. The clearer the rules are before the ceremony, the easier it is for fans to accept moments that otherwise look strange. If a team cannot go into one group because of a confederation limit, the audience should understand that this is not improvisation. It is the rulebook doing its job. For the biggest nations, the draw can be a trap in a different way. A seeded team is expected to control its group, but in 2026, it may have to manage travel, heat, an unfamiliar opponent, a third-place points race, and the emotional weight of being favorite. The draw can create a path that looks manageable on paper, but becomes exhausting in practice. Winning a group may still matter, but managing energy across a longer tournament may matter just as much. This is why the 2026 draw should be judged on more than headline matches. The obvious blockbuster fixtures will get the attention, but the hidden story will be structure. Which groups are balanced? Which routes look travel-heavy? Which teams may benefit from stadium familiarity? Which third-place paths seem realistic? Which group winners could face harder knockout roads than expected? Those questions are where the real draw analysis begins. For smaller football nations, this complexity comes with opportunity. Expansion gives more teams a place on the stage, and the draw can suddenly place a debutante against a giant, a regional rival against a familiar opponent, or a tactical outsider into a group where its style becomes a real problem. That is part of the beauty of a larger World Cup. The risk is that the structure becomes harder to follow. The reward is that more stories enter the tournament from day one.